Joining us now, NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, and former lead investigator for the January 6th committee, Timothy Hafey. Everybody, welcome. So, Laura, I'll begin with you. There's a lot of talk about why this Supreme Court wanted to hear this case at all. Can you give us any insight into what you were thinking of?
I think that we're watching a tension at play here. Donald Trump's legal team asked the Supreme Court to weigh in on this on February 12th. So it took them roughly 2 weeks to say, yes, they want to hear it. You only need 5 votes to say, yes, you want to hear it, to grant cert, to actually take up the case. Jack Smith asked the Supreme Court to look at this exact same issue back in December, and they said no. And so my question has been, why say yes now and say no back in December? What has changed in those intervening months? And something must have changed, because they didn't really need the D.C. Circuit to say he's not immune, right? They're gonna look at this with a fresh set of eyes all themselves. So what did they glean by having this long period of delay from December until now? That's the question.
Did they glean anything, or I mean, there are a lot of people out there saying that this is them doing the partisan bidding of Donald Trump. That he likes to delay, is a whole history of delaying. If he delays long enough, this case won't happen before Election Day, and if he wins, then he can dismiss this case outright. Is there credence to say the Supreme Court or some faction of the Supreme Court might be helping him delay?
I don't know that we have any reporting to suggest that. And the fact that they are agreeing to hear it on the week of April 22nd, it was part of the tension that I want to explore, right? Because they didn't just say, oh, well, we'll get to it when we get to it. They're hearing it on what for them is an expedited timeline. Now, they're not hearing it quite as fast as Jack Smith wanted, to be fair. On the other hand, I'm not so sure that it's all that clear that they should take into account when and where the election is taking place, right? Of course, that's part of the reality of the situation, that this entire case goes away. Jack Smith goes away entirely if the former president is reelected. But we've always been sort of assuming that this all has to happen before the election. And I'm not so sure that these justices actually feel that that is something that is their role to do.
Could this just be giving him all the due process that he could possibly need or want to go overboard and trying to say that Donald Trump was treated as fairly as possible in our current judicial system?
It could be, but I want to pick up on something that Laura said about what has changed in that period of time between when Jack Smith asked them to review initially and when they decided to take the case. I can think of one thing that changed, and that's Donald Trump filed a motion to dismiss the Florida case on presidential immunity grounds as well. So to the extent that there was anybody who was sort of on the fence about whether to grant cert, the fact that this issue is likely to recur, even though I think that motion is even more of a loser than the presidential immunity defense in the federal election interference case, that could have been the tipping point. And, to Laura's point, it actually takes 4 votes to grant cert, 5 to grant a stay. And they didn't. They granted a stay in effect. But the way that they granted the motion yesterday was by converting Donald Trump's stay motion into a petition for certiorari and granting that. So reading between the lines, there may have only been 4 votes to hear this case, or there might have been a courtesy 5th. We just don't know.
I know that we're talking a lot about the motivation here, but the motivation, Tim, seems to really matter, especially on an issue as politically sensitive as this one, in this extremely politically sensitive moment.
Yeah, absolutely, Katie. Look, but lawyers, responsible ones, only traffic in facts and not speculation. And I don't have any facts which would support any argument that this is a politically motivated Supreme Court. I don't assume that because a justice is appointed by the former president that he or she is more loyal to him. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, absent evidence of political motivation. Huge political impact, regardless of the motivation, in terms of the timing of the trial. As you have said, as everyone has said, this pushes it back. It doesn't necessarily push it back beyond the date of the election. There is a scenario by which the court resolves the case very quickly, very soon after the April 22nd oral argument. The Judge Chutkan sets the case for trial 88 days from then, which would put us into late summer, early fall. And the case, tried very efficiently and expeditiously by the special counsel, is resolved by Election Day. That is getting increasingly difficult to predict. perhaps unlikely, but there is still a scenario by which the case is resolved. And I do think there's a paramount public interest in having this case finally see its day in court. Government presents its case, the defendant entitled to his presumption of innocence, challenges the evidence. That has the potential to move the needle of public opinion way beyond anything the Select Committee did, or with all due respect, journalists or anybody else do, in terms of credibility of the finding.
Could there be something in the D.C. court ruling that basically just blew Donald Trump's argument of immunity out of the water? Could there be something in that very long decision that the Supreme Court doesn't entirely agree with? Maybe they want to draw a finer line to say there are some instances when the president is using his decision-making ability in a tough situation, maybe it's a drone strike somewhere, where they should enjoy a certain level of immunity.
Yeah, look, the court, there probably are justices on the court who take issue with some or all of the D.C. Circuit opinion, right? The grant of cert suggests that at least there is some potential controversy on the Supreme Court that would call into question the D.C. Circuit's really careful, really thorough opinion. I don't think there's any chance that President Trump wins this case at the Supreme Court. Again, responsible lawyers here kind of universally have handicapped this as a very strong case for the special counsel. Whether there's a justice or two who wants to try to narrow the standard or even dissents from a majority finding of affirmance of the D.C. Circuit, that there's a chance of that. But I do think that this case is headed for a criminal trial without the president being granted blanket immunity.
Are you entirely confident that they're going to hand down a decision by the end of this term, by June? They're not just going to sit on it until the next term.
No, you can't be entirely confident about anything with the Supreme Court. It's a bit of a black box. I do think the fact that they issued an expedited briefing schedule demonstrates that they are mindful of the need for prompt resolution. I think at the very latest, we would see an opinion at the very end of their term, which is around July 1st. I think there's a decent chance that they'll issue an opinion in the case very soon after the April 22nd oral argument, given the urgency of getting this case for trial. Right? It is really paramount for America that these allegations are tried in a federal criminal proceeding. And I hope that judges believing in the rule of law see that and facilitate that by resolving this as quickly as possible.